On August 23, 1958, the short 90 Night Bugs was released into theaters. Set in the times of King Arthur and his Knights of the Round Table, the short has Bugs, playing a lowly court jester, be tasked with retrieving the legendary singing sword from the devious Black Knight, here played by, of all people, Yosemite Sam.
Open that bridge, varmint! Open it, I say! Close it! Close it! Close it up again!
In spite of the more adventurous setup and a string of inventive gags involving Sam's pet fire-breathing dragon with a terrible case of hay fever, there was really nothing exceptional about this short. At its core, it was just another Bugs and Sam matchup with different costumes and setting. But it must have been a success because not only was it nominated for the Best Animated Short Oscar at the 1959 Academy Awards, it won it, beating out Walt Disney Studios' Paul Bunyan and Terry Toon's Sydney's Family Tree. Upon further examination, it makes sense that 90 Night Bugs took home the Oscar. In spite of its standard formula, it was actually one of the stronger shorts Termite Terrace had produced that year. Director Friz Freleng really did bring his A-game with this one.
I'm a-coming over the wall!
Most importantly, this was the very first Bugs Bunny short to have ever won an Academy Award. Bugs had been a perennial nominee ever since his true film debut with 1940's A Wild Hare. But now, after 18 years in the spotlight, Warner Brothers' own Wascally Wabbit had finally netted himself the coveted Oscar. The more cynically minded would say that the win by 90 Night Bugs was just the Academy throwing Warner Brothers a bone, a consolation prize awarded 10 years too late. The equivalent of giving an influential yet perpetually winless film director a Lifetime Achievement Award at the twilight of their career. But, in retrospect, this would be a case of being better late than never, because this would be the last Best Animated Short Oscar that Warner Brothers Cartoons would win in its classical era. The workers at Termite Terrace were about to be confronted with a harsh reality for the next couple of years. Once you reach your peak, the only direction you can go from there is downhill.
Okay, Smokey, roll 'em. And now if you'll all be quiet, we'll start the show. Chapter 1. Once upon a time... Great opening, huh? Who? Disassociated Press? The public has been demanding my life story?
Peaceful, quiet, serene, a picture of complete tranquility. And then, overnight, it happened. Television.
The 1950s belonged to television. While the technology for the cathode ray tube television was perfected in the 1930s, events like the Great Depression and World War II kept it a luxury item not fit for mass production. However, the post-war economic boom changed all that, turning the television into the most sought-after commodity for the average American family. In 1950, 3.8 million households owned a TV, which accounted for 9% of Americans. By 1954, that number had jumped up to 26 million, more than half of American households. And by the end of the decade, 43.9 million households owned a television set, accounting for 85.9% of American households. Because the 50s were a time of peace and prosperity for Americans, white Americans to be more precise, television instantly became a cornerstone of American culture. Children who were born after World War II, the baby boomer generation, were consuming upwards of 13 hours of television per week. Naturally, this new technology had a huge effect on film studios. On top of the Red Scare, suburban flight, and the collapse of the studio system, the main drive in the film industry's downturn in box office revenue was television. Since you could just stay at home and get quality visual entertainment there, most people no longer saw the need to enjoy a night at the theater. The major film studios knew they had to get on this train to make up the difference. While government regulations meant that they couldn't own their own television networks, they could produce TV shows and license out their film libraries as a way to promote their brands. Some were quicker on the draw than others, Columbia Pictures being the first studio to invest in their own television programs as early as 1948. Other studios, however, were more resistant to this new technology, one of these studios being Warner Brothers. Jack Warner was vocal in his disdain for television, to the point that he wouldn't even allow TV sets to be a part of his film scenery. Eventually, his studio would enter the film of television production, albeit very grudgingly, in 1954. Warner Brothers Television Operations was divided up into two subsidiaries, Sunset Productions and Warner Brothers Television. Warner Brothers Television was run by the studio where they produced famous TV westerns such as Maverick and Colt 45. Sunset Productions, meanwhile, was run by Jack Warner's son, Jack Warner Jr. Jr. had been the one to push his old man into venturing into television, and he was rewarded by his father gifting him his own studio, and then pulled a fast one by founding his own television studio, thus leaving his own Flesh and Blood, a production company that could only license out existing Warner Brother properties and was forbidden from shooting any pilot films. If you haven't caught on by now, Jack Warner was a notorious asshole. Using what little they could do, Jack Jr. and Sunset Productions turned to an area of the studio that the brass had been ignoring for some time now: the Looney Tunes. Sunset Films licensed out 191 Warner Brothers shorts to the company Guild Films in 1955 for a modest $1 million. The shorts were all black and white Looney Tunes shorts produced in between 1930 and 1943, in addition to all the black and white Merrie melodies not done by Hugh Harman and Rudy Ising, excluding Lady Play Your Mandolin. Warner Brothers stipulated that the studio logo had to be edited out of every one of these shorts and replaced with the Sunset Films logo, believing that having the studio be associated with these licensed shorts would damage Warner Brothers' prestigious brands. Within their first year, Guild Films had made double their money back in licensing out the black and white Looney Tunes shorts to local networks, which in turn would have them air as part of children variety shows. Thus would be the Looney Tunes' first step into the television medium, and it would not stop there. In 1956, Jack Warner sold off Warner Brothers' entire pre-1950 film library to television distribution company Associated Artists Productions, or AAP for short. In this deal, Warner not only gave AAP the films and their licenses, but also their entire copyrights. This made Jack's brother Harry Warner furious, not only because he felt that his brother had sold out the studio's entire film heritage, but because he also sold it at a paltry $21 million. Sometime later, Jack would use that $21 million he made off of AAP to secretly buy out his family's share of the company, consolidate power, and install himself as president of the entire Warner Brothers studio. Once again, asshole. Within that AAP deal, Jack Warner had also sold them every pre-1948 short that wasn't currently owned by Guild Films. That meant AAP got every color Looney Tunes short up to Hair Devil Hair, every color Merrie Melody short up to The Shell-Shocked Egg, and every Harman and Ising black and white Merrie Melody short not named Lady Play Your Mandolin. Approximately 338 Looney Tunes shorts that Jack Warner had sold AAP for $3,000 a pop. And since they owned the shorts no strings attached, AAP could air the shorts with the Warner Brothers logo intact alongside their own logo. To help catalog these shorts, AAP hired a big name in television at the time, Bob Clampett. After his departure from Termite Terrace, Bob Clampett did try to keep a career in animated cartoon shorts, but by 1949, he figured that the future was in this newfangled television programming. Clampett would end up creating some of the most famous puppet shows that aired on television in the 50s, such as Time for Beanie. AAP was also one of the first companies to kick off a very primitive form of home video by releasing the Looney Tunes on 8mm films. These shorts were silent and in black and white, but they were still a way to bring Looney Tunes to the masses like with television. By the late 50s, thanks to the advent of TV, the Looney Tunes were becoming more well known thanks to their theatrical shorts being more accessible outside of theaters. However, while the shorts being available outside of theaters can be good for the brands, it might not be as good for the people still making those shorts for theaters. It was late in the summer of 1955 when Warner Brothers sold its Sunset Boulevard lot to Paramount Pictures, the same Sunset Boulevard lot their cartoon studio had been situated on since 1933. The Termite Terrace staff was soon set up in a brand new building in the corner of Warner Brothers' brand new Burbank lot. On one hand, the new digs were sorely needed. The previous building was old and ramshackle even back when Leon Schlesinger had bought it, and the animation staff had long outgrown the need for it. On the other hand, it did represent a more symbolic change. Warner Brothers Cartoon Studio had always operated as a separate entity since its conception, but year after year, it felt like the studio was slowly but surely tightening the leash around it through its continuous budget cuts. The move to be closer to the main studio all but sealed the deal that the freewheeling days of Termite Terrace were officially a thing of the past. By the late 50s, it honestly felt like the glory days of Termite Terrace's creators were behind them, as the quality of their output was either declining or plateauing. The decline in quality had become much more noticeable in the shorts done by Robert McKimson. McKimson was often stuck with writer Ted Pierce for his shorts. Pierce, widely regarded as the weakest writer of the cartoon studio's pool, often felt the desperate need to keep the Warner cartoons relevant in the age of television. This resulted in a lot of McKimson shorts of this era heavily involving TV or parodies of popular TV shows such as the Jack Benny program or The Honeymooners.
One of these days, Alice, one of these days, pow! Right in the kisser!
The Looney Tunes were no stranger for set-in-time parodies, and these shorts were no exception. But it was also a bad sign for both McKimson and Pierce that they were using pop cultural references as a crutch rather than a springboard for jokes. And while McKimson still could occasionally spin gold in this era, like The High and the Flighty, a Foghorn Leghorn cartoon where the title character and Barnyard Dog team up against Daffy and his scheming salesman persona,
Well, look what we got here. You know, there just might be a market for bottled duck.
the reality of the situation was that McKimson was just checked out at this point. Take a shot every time one of his shorts from this period ends with a shrug and a sheesh. Friz Freleng was doing a lot better by comparison, churning out Sylvester and Tweety and Bugs Bunny shorts of solid quality.
Take one step on that rope and I'll cut it. My, what big muscles you got.
He was also the director most aware of the studio's financial situation, and on top of his economic approaches to directing, he was actively pursuing funding outside the studio system. He had accepted an underwritten deal from the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation to produce 3 cartoon shorts that taught audiences about how great American capitalism was because the Cold War had just started, By Word of Mouth, Hair Conditioned, and Yankee Dood It.
New and more efficient industries made more jobs and higher wages, and shorter working hours to enjoy the higher standard of living.
Business propaganda aside, the main criticism of Freleng's shorts from this era was that he was retreading a lot of old ground. The shorts were still funny, but they definitely lost a lot of their zing once people gained more access to the whole shorts library and found the gags were a lot funnier when they were done a decade ago.
I don't know how you's done it, but I know you's done it. I don't know how you's done it, but I know you's done it!
Chuck Jones and his unit were doing just as bad as well as Freleng's, still creating quality shorts for Bugs, Daffy, and the rest.
Yoinks and away! Yoinks and away! Yoinks and away! Yoinks and away!
But it was also becoming quite clear that Jones's interest in the rabbit after What's Opera Doc had waned considerably. In the Bugs cartoons Jones did, he would usually be paired up with a humorous foil to suffer the more comedic indignities, like a Wile E. Coyote. Or Chuck's old favorite punching bag, Daffy Duck.
Pat him and pet him and
You're hurting me. Put me down, please.
rub him and caress him and...
I ain't no bunny rabbit!
Jones was way more focused on doing Pepe Le Pew shorts or Roadrunner shorts, which had really hit their stride around this time. Jones was also focused on his brand new Sam and Ralph series of shorts. This was also meant to play around with the concept of the chase cartoon, treating the tried and true formula as if it were a typical blue-collar job.
Now let me down asleep. Play tomorrow song.
At this time, it seemed like even the best shorts were echoing a weariness that came with the series lasting for almost 3 decades. But they were still clearly Looney Tunes shorts with all the associated hallmarks. Termite Terrace could easily keep this consistent quality up for many more years, barring any big shakeups and departures at the studio. In 1958, the studio was struck by a series of big shakeups and departures. The first major one was producer Eddie Seltzer announcing his retirement on January 10th, the eve of his 65th birthday. He was replaced by cinematographer and Termite Terrace's production manager since the mid-40s, John W. Burton. Like Seltzer before him, he received no on-screen credits, but he did get to accept the Academy Awards for all the hard work the animators did. Another more serious shakeup came when composer Carl Stalling announced his retirement as well at the age of 67. Stalling had been a vital organism to the soundscape of the Looney Tunes shorts since the mid-30s. He was practically irreplaceable. Luckily, he had a replacement lined up in his arranger, Milt Franklin. Franklin had been working alongside Stalling his entire tenure at Warner Brothers and even filled in for him when he was absent because of how familiar he was of his style. This allowed for a natural transition that did not affect the overall quality of the Looney Tunes scores. But the biggest blow to the Warner Brothers cartoon studio that year was the sudden departures of longtime talent, which included storymen Warren Foster and Michael Maltese. I went to the studio and looked in Mike's room and found he was gone. When I asked Chuck about it, he told me Mike had left the studio, along with some others, such as layout man Bob Givens. There was no big farewell or anything like that. It was kinda sad. Unlike with Stalling, there were no replacements for Foster and Maltese waiting in the wings. How could they even be replaced? They were Freeling's and Jones's right-hand men for a good reason, both exhibiting a natural talent for writing jokes and giving a better depth of understanding for the cast of Looney Tunes. The loss of the two men would be an event Termite Terrace would never really recover from. While the exodus of Foster and Maltese weren't done in acrimony, it was a signal that the Warner Brothers shorts were losing major ground to television animation, as the studio the two men went to was the newly established Hanna-Barbera Studios. Founded just last year by ex-MGM directors Bill Hanna and Joe Barbera, Hanna-Barbera was the first animation studio to successfully make animation exclusively for television. TV animation moved a lot stiffer and operated a lot cheaper when compared to theatrical animation. It was also a lot more massively successful. The Huckleberry Hound show, which premiered that September, was already a smash hit in the ratings. It wasn't so much that Foster and Maltese and others were unhappy at Termite Terrace, it's just that they knew where the winds were blowing. Walt Disney had transitioned his theatrical shorts department to TV animation in 1955, and MGM Studios had completely shuttered their animation studio in 1957, allowing Hanna and Barbera to start their studio in the first place. It was clear Termite Terrace could not survive on theatrical shorts alone. One way or another, they had to get into the television game. Sure, their older shorts were being licensed out to networks, but Jack Warner's short-sighted greed saw that the studio saw none of the dollars those shorts were generating. Plus, the licensing deals were going through their own set of turnovers. After a failed bid to buy MGM's library of cartoon shorts in 1957, AAP found itself in the middle of a shareholder revolt that eventually went to court. The end result was that the company was acquired by the studio United Artists for a cool $27 million. Sunset Productions also shut down that same year, leaving Guild Films the sole benefactor of the black and white shorts. It seemed like every other studio understood the value of Warner Brothers cartoons airing on TV, except for Warner Brothers. It wouldn't be until the 1950s had ended and the 1960s had begun that some genius executive finally got sick of all of this and decided that Warner Brothers needed to bring the Looney Tunes to television in a way that they alone would benefit from, and they would have to do it in a big way.
The Bugs Bunny Show.
Overture, cut the lights. This is it, the night of nights.
On October 11th at 7:30 p.m., broadcast nationally on ABC, The Bugs Bunny Show premiered on televisions all across America. Operating in a half-hour format and airing in a primetime slot every Tuesday, The Bugs Bunny Show was a block of 3 Looney Tunes shorts with animated wraparounds featuring Bugs, Daffy, and the rest of the Looney crew hosting a vaudeville-style theater show, all of which was obviously inspired by the 1957 Friz Freleng short, Showbiz Bugs. While they aired mostly in black and white, all the segments were produced in color. These wraparounds were animated by the staff at Warner Brothers Cartoons. Chuck Jones and Friz Freleng directed, produced, and storyboarded these segments for most of the early episodes. Robert McKimson would end up taking over direction, while Jones and Freleng continued to storyboard and produce for the rest of the show's run. Mel Blanc was also there to provide voiceovers for all the Looney Tunes characters, naturally. The only one who was unable to return was Arthur Q. Bryan, the voice of Elmer Fudd. Bryan had sadly passed away at age 60 on November 30th in 1959 of a sudden heart attack, his last role as Elmer being in the 1960 shorts Person to Bunny. Mel Blanc assumed his role on The Bugs Bunny Show, while actor Hal Smith assumed the role of Elmer in the theatrical shorts.
Oh boy, it finally got here. I can hardly wait to play it. My own private game of Kill the Lion.
The Bugs Bunny Show did more for the Looney Tunes than just keep them in the public eye. It helped build their brand as this all-star stable of cartoon stars, each with their own recognizable shticks. But most importantly, it introduced the Looney Tunes into another world that wouldn't have been possible without TV. The world of advertising. Like every TV show at the time, The Bugs Bunny Show ran under a corporate sponsorship. Their sponsor was the General Foods Corporation, so in between the shorts and the wraparounds, audiences were also treated to animated advertisements of Bugs, Daffy and Company hawking General Milk products such as Alphabets, Sugar Crisp, and Tang.
Now that's what I call a wild gold chase. Here's what I'm after, instant Tang.
These commercials were also directed by Jones, Freleng, and McKimson. Tex Avery even came back to animate one for Kool-Aid. While using classic cartoon characters as TV pitchmen might still appear to be gauche, even for the time, it was keeping the lights on at Termite Terrace. The Bugs Bunny Show was justifying Warner Brothers Cartoons' existence in an age where television was consuming all and theatrical shorts were going the way of the dinosaur. But it wasn't as if Termite Terrace had stopped making theatrical shorts in the wake of a new TV show and commercial spots. On the contrary, theatrical shorts were still being pumped out at the dawn of the 60s, and it made for an interesting time at the studio, to say the least. The big changes that had befell the studio in 1958 did not relent come the start of 1960. John W. Burton tendered his resignation on January 15th at the start of the year. His replacement was a young 31-year-old Warner Brothers executive named David H. DePatie. Prior to this, DePatie had been the head of Warner Brothers Commercial Film Company for 2 years, a job he had gotten through his father Edmund's connection as the head of Warner Brothers Counter Department. DePatie would not deny the role of nepotism in his career path, referring to himself as a Warner brat. But Warner brat or not, DePatie not only kept out of Termite Terrace's business just like his predecessors, he actually gave them more freedom. Since nearly all the men working there knew about the animation business for longer than he had been alive, DePatie decided to cut them loose and allow them to make their own decisions. This meant that Jones and Freleng could now give co-directing credits to their layout men, Maurice Noble and Hawley Pratt respectively, as they both felt the two of them were just as important to the direction process as they themselves were. But even with this newfound freedom, there was still one major problem. The decline in demand for theatrical shorts meant that the already tight budgets got even tighter. Not only did this mean fewer shorts coming out per year, but it also meant that the shorts began to become flatter and more abstract in their overall style. Compare a short from 1960 to one from 1950, and compare that to one from 1940. The lush backdrops had given way to modernist minimalism, and the lively character animation had given way to a style that prioritized holds and strong posing. This caused the shorts of Robert McKimson and Friz Freleng to either have their humor feel limited and restrained, or just flat out have their flaws laid completely bare for all the world to see. Chuck Jones, however, thrived in this environment. He had been both a fan and advocate of animation that emphasized stylized efficiency even before UBA had become a household name. A combination of financial difficulties and John Hubley refusing to name names during the Red Scare had caused UPA to abandon theatrical animation for the safe harbor of television by the mid-50s. By the end of the decade, there was a void left for stylishly modern cartoon shorts that eschewed slapstick in favor of a more highbrow wit. And since Jones was the most UPA adjacent animator still working in theatrical shorts, he figured that this was his time to step up to the plate. Jones had been doing UPA-esque shorts for most of the 50s, but he never really fully committed to that style. Come 1960, he was ready to make that next step. Chuck Jones's short High Note was released into theaters on December 3rd, 1960. The short is a musical one focused on a group of anthropomorphic musical notes lined up on sheet music to perform the Blue Danube. However, one note has instead chosen to disappear and go get drunk, and it is up to the conductor to put him in his place. Literally. In High Note, Jones has fully embraced the flat modernism of the mid-century. He and Maurice Noble take advantage of the graphic-based figures of the notes and animating them to their fullest, giving life to the simple and inorganic. High Note is also one of Michael Maltese's last credits before he left for Hanna-Barbera. Within the industry, High Note was considered Warner's most successful short that year and earned Jones yet another Academy Award nomination, which he ultimately lost to Gene Deitch's anti-military farce, Monroe. But now Jones had gotten a taste for creating more UPA-like one-off shorts, and he was ready to go all in. The next of these shorts was 1961's Nellie's Folly. The short tells what is seemingly a children's story about a singing giraffe named Nellie and how she left the jungle to become a star in the big city.
But one thing you can reckon, that when it comes to a necking, I'm the queen of the wild, wild west.
Nellie, with her voice provided by famed singer and voice actress Gloria Wood, ends up becoming a huge singing sensation. However, her career ends up going down in flames thanks to, of all things, her being an accessory to adultery.
Nellie received the greatest insult ever accorded an actress. An empty house. The public will forgive anything in a star but infidelity.
Nellie's Folly is one of the more explicitly adult Looney Tunes, and, in a period where television was causing animation to be seen as a medium meant solely for children, quite daring. This also earned Chuck another Oscar nomination that he would lose to Dusan Vukotek's landmark Yugoslavian animated short, Ersatz. High Note was a concept that was more interesting than it was funny, and Nellie's Folly was deliberately trying not to be funny. So they end up occupying weird spaces in between the other Looney Tunes shorts that are still utilizing the classic slapstick. But they were still good shorts in their own right, unlike the later shorts of this caliber that Jones would attempt. A more scornful theory might posit that the reason why Jones kept on riding the UPA light train was because it appeared to be the easiest way to get Oscar nominations. We don't know if that's true or not, but it would definitely explain why a lot of his one-off shorts started to become what some would call pretentious. Shorts such as 1962's Martian Through Georgia, a dreary monologue-based short about how a Martian's quest for happiness brings him to Earth, and the only conclusion he comes away with is that he needs to stick with his own kind.
If you're an unwanted monster, what are you going to do? Commit suicide? Why not, if nobody loves you?
Jones would also bookend his earlier Tom Thumb-based short that appropriated the Disney style with 1963's I Was a Teenage Thumb, a Tom Thumb short that appropriated the UPA style, dry narration and all.
And so, Tom Thumb became Sir Thomas of Thumbaton, and performed many valorous deeds for his king, ridding the country of ravaging dragons. Only the smaller varieties, of course.
But the nadir of this experimentation came that same year with the short, Now Hear This. Centered around an elderly British man who accidentally uses one of Satan's horns as an ear trumpet and having hijinks ensue, the short is this odd, extremely experimental piece that relies only on sound effects and eye-popping pop art to convey its humor, and it completely squanders this inventive premise by having the timing be slow and deliberate, causing the short to move sluggishly and the humor feeling more off-putting than funny. Jones himself even admitted that he didn't understand what he was trying to accomplish with the short in the first place, and maybe that he and his team went too far into left field in the execution. It really did not matter at this point because Chuck Jones's love affair with the UPA style was about to be his downfall. One of the more understated events that happened over time during John Burton's brief tenure as producer was the gradual dissolution of the 3 directorial unit system, as the directors started allowing their fellow animators to take on directing credits, mostly as a means to offset their workload that consisted of the shorts, the TV show, and various commercial projects all at the same time. One of these animators was Abe Levito, a mainstay of Jones' unit going all the way back to 1953. He was known for helping give the characters more angular designs in order to have them animate better in his cuts. By 1956, Jones began to start giving Levito chances in the director's chair, starting with the Pepe Le Pew short Really Sent, which wouldn't get an official release until 1959. Through the late 50s to early 60s, Levito would get sporadic director's credit, whether they were solo efforts like A Witch's Tangled Hair, or teaming up with Chuck Jones and Maurice Noble with shorts like Baton Bunny, or the aforementioned Nellie's Folly. After finishing up work on Jones's Marching Through Georgia, Levito left Warner Brothers to go work at, of all places, UPA. The studio had just been purchased by film producer Henry G. Saperstein. Saperstein had bought the studio in order to turn it into a cartoon powerhouse on the level of Hanna-Barbera. He did this by halting all of their industrial shorts operations and turning to TV animation with cartoons based off of Mr. Magoo and the comic book Dick Tracy. But Saperstein also greenlit 2 very ambitious projects and made sure to put Abe Levito at the helm for both of them. One was Magoo's Christmas Carol. It was one of Saperstein's many attempts to make Magoo a lucrative franchise, and it ended up being the first true animated Christmas special to have ever aired on TV. The other was to be a theatrically released film. UPA had tried their luck with feature-length animation with the 1959 Magoo-helmed bomb 1001 Nights, and it was the reason why the studio had to be sold to Saperstein in the first place. They were hoping that this one would be different.
Jean-Tan, my love for you is formidable.
Released on December 17, 1962, the film was called Gay Purr-ee. Set in France during the gay 90s, it's an animated musical about a starstruck young cat named Musette who wishes to leave her humble country backdrop in favor of the lights and glamour of Paris. But her naivete allows her to be taken in and groomed by a trafficker named Meow Reese, and it is up to her boyfriend, Juan Tom, to save her. At the time, the film was noteworthy for being an animated star vehicle for Judy Garland and Robert Goulet. But the most important fact about the movie that's relevant to this story was the one who wrote it. UPA had bought the screenplay for Gay Purr-ee from the following authors: Dorothy Jones and her husband Chuck. There was no denying that Chuck was heavily involved in the production of Gay Purr-ee. He had not only written the screenplay, but nearly all the characters carry a lot of his sensibilities in their designs. It was understandable why Chuck really wanted to be involved with this project. UPA was a studio that he both admired and had assisted off the books in the past. Possibly to him, this was just another one of those types of projects on a grander scale, one he and animators he knew and respected were personally involved with. However, the off-the-books work Jones had done for UPA in the 40s were industrial shorts that rarely, if at all, had credits attached to them. This was a theatrical film going into wide release. Being the main screenwriter for a movie like this was not something you could go uncredited for like an animator. If Warner Brothers found out Jones was involved with a production that was not being done by Termite Terrace, he would be found in violation of his exclusivity contract and would catch holy hell from Warner Legal. But maybe this could work out. So long as Warner Brothers was not the distributor for Gay Purr-ee, Jones could probably be in the clear. When it came time to find a distributor for the film, UPA's usual distributor Columbia turned it down in the wake of their diminishing returns at the box office. But luckily for UPA, Gay Purr-ee was immediately snatched up by another distributor. That distributor was Warner Brothers. Chuck Jones was found out immediately. The studio noticed his name was on the script, found out he had violated his exclusivity contract, and started drafting up his walking papers. After several weeks of unpaid suspension, Jones was effectively fired from Warner Brothers Cartoons on July 23, 1962, bringing an end to almost 30 years of employment at the studio. Jones' last Bugs Bunny short he completed was 1963's Transylvania 6500, and the last Warner short he finished full stop was the Roadrunner short War and Pieces. Gay Purr-ee, while a hit with critics, ended up being a bomb at the box office, which was the coldest of comforts for Jones and the rest of UBA. UBA's influence stalled out there, and it would shut down all animation operations by 1970. But maybe it was for the best Chuck Jones left the studio, even if it was by force. Because, in its current state, Termite Terrace was not long for this world. In the mid-August of 1962, The Bugs Bunny Show ended its primetime run with 52 episodes under its belt. From that point onwards, it would air in reruns every Saturday mornings. It was a far better position to be in than the studio that had spawned it. Outside of Jones's unit in the 60s, Termite Terrace was an absolute mess, and that mess got reflected on screen. It seemed like as long as the studio was existing, the executives kept tightening its belts, making all the shorts look cheaper and cheaper with each passing season. McKimson and Freeling had really found themselves in creative ruts. Both men had spent 3 decades with these characters and were at a loss of where else they could take them, especially in the case of Bugs. After a point, it seemed like any Bugs short made was just him going through the motions of a typical Bugs Bunny short. Some animation fans have even officially dubbed the Wabbit of this era Fat Elvis Bugs, or Zombie Bugs. But a real big negative change came quite unexpectedly in the sound design when Milt Franklin died of a sudden heart attack in 1962. He was in the middle of composing the score for the Tweety cartoon The Jet Cage. His replacement was a veteran Hollywood composer named Bill Lava. Lava had been an arranger for film and radio soundtracks since the mid-30s, so on paper he seemed like the right man for the job. But Lava's influences were way different than Stallings or Franklin's. Instead of the classics, vaudeville, or big bands, Lava preferred taking inspiration from more eclectic, cutting-edge sounds. This results in a lot of his scores for the shorts being defined by instruments such as xylophones and electric guitars. From his compositions alone, you can tell Lava is more than competent at his job, but he wasn't the right fit for Looney Tunes. His scores sounded mechanical and dissonant compared to Stallings' vibrant scores which complemented the action on screen. These were exacerbated by budget cuts dismantling Stallings' full orchestra, leaving Lava with fewer resources to work with. Also, on January 24th, 1961, Mel Blanc was in a near-fatal car accident and wound up confined to a hospital bed for 2 months. He still had to do voice acting, even from a body cast, and even had his son Noel ghost for him in some line readings. This results in a lot of his performances of this period being flatter than usual, thanks to him doing it all while he's still in recovery. So with the ever-shrinking budgets, the directors struggling for inspiration, the new soundtracks not gelling, and having their star voice actor in traction, it's no wonder that the quality of the Looney Tunes shorts were tumbling off a cliff. This was the period that birthed a lot of infamously bad Looney Tunes shorts like Shishka Bugs, Aqueduct, and Mexican Cat Dance. With Bad Situation piling on top of Bad Situation, it was just an overall ugly time to be working at Termite Terrace. A sentiment that Friz Freleng agreed with because, in November of 1962, he left Warner Brothers for another job at Hanna-Barbera. This should have been the signal that the writing was on the wall, and that the studio was going to be shut down by the end of the year. But that was not the case. Back in 1960, Jones and Freleng made an agreement with Warner Brothers that, no matter what happens, they should at least try to keep the cartoon studio open for another 3 years. During those 3 years, Jones was fired and Freleng had resigned, but Warner Brothers still decided to keep their end of the bargain. The studio would last up until the spring of 1963, after which point it would be closed. McKimson and other animators like Phil Monroe and Jerry Shaniqua would try their best to direct creative and funny shorts with the shrinking staff they had, sometimes getting at least one good joke in on occasion.
I saw a guy do this in a toothpaste ad once. Ta-da!
But they all knew they were living on borrowed time. Come that May, Warner Brothers Cartoons would close up shop. Between 1962 to 64, a lot of Looney Tunes characters made their final appearances in the classical era. The last Pepe Le Pew short premiered on August 18, 1962. The last Sam and Ralph short, May 11, 1963. The last Foghorn Leghorn short, June 19, 1963. Last Yosemite Sam short, January 18, 1964. Last Tasmanian Devil short, May 16, 1964. Last Sylvester and Tweety short, June 27, 1964. And the last Bugs Bunny short of the classic era, The Underwhelming False Hair, premiered on July 16, 1964. It was also the last short completed before the closure. I would like to say that this is where the Looney Tunes story ends. It ends with problems piling on, leading to a decline, before finally coming to a complete and natural stop. The logical endpoint for an animation studio's life cycle. I would like to say that this is where it all ends, but I can't, for that would be lying. Even before the studio closed down in the spring of 1963, there was rumors swirling in the atmosphere that the studio would continue on in another shape or form. And in a few months, those rumors would turn out to be true. You really could not keep a studio like Termite Terrace down for very long. Defying all rational thinking, it was going to rise from its shallow grave and bear itself down upon the fearful masses. The Looney Tunes were not going out quietly, and they certainly weren't going out with dignity. This video was made possible by the good people at Patreon. If you want to support this miniseries, Kyoto Video, or all other future video projects, then click on the link below and join today. You'll get news feeds, early access to videos, maybe even your name in the credits. Each dollar will be going towards making this channel even better. You can also support this channel by liking this video, commenting on it, hitting the subscribe button, hitting that bell button for notifications, and sharing it with all your friends. That's all for now, folks. Thank you for watching.